Today we're going to talk about responsible AI use for municipalities and, of course, any other public sector. So, just with a raise of hands, maybe in the Microsoft Teams here, how many municipalities right now are using some sort of AI technology? Okay, so we got a couple people. So we're going to talk a little bit about the privacy concerns that we have when it relates to the POPA and the ATIA. We're going to talk about some cautionary, what happens when you don't use AI responsibly. And then we're going to talk about some real world examples of what some municipalities are doing and have been publicly known for doing with AI. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to kind of protect yourself when it comes to implementing new AI technologies. So I'll get started here. For those who are running a little bit behind, they'll just have to catch up or watch the video afterwards, as that will be available as well. I suspect the webinar will probably last about 45 minutes. So a little bit about who TRINUS is, for those who don't know who TRINUS is. We are a managed solutions provider and managed cybersecurity solutions provider in Stony Plain. We've been in operation since 1997 with our vision to be the Western Canadian leader of complete technology solutions for local government and small to medium-sized business by delivering secure, innovative, and proven systems to solve any technology need. Our core values here at TRINUS are reliability, client focus, and professionalism. And a little bit about who I am. My name is Damon Mascott. I have been with TRINUS for almost over a decade now, actually, now that I think about it. I've kind of went through a transition here at TRINUS. So I've gone from working in the IT trenches to account management to sales management and outside sales where I am now. So with all of that, it's equipped me with the deep understanding of tech and how to communicate that and build relationships with our clients with a client focus. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, I think I kind of summarized that a little bit. Like I said, we're going to talk about what's good about AI in municipalities, what are some risks that municipalities might face when implementing AI, some of the real world examples, and then of course how to make sure that you're implementing it properly. So we'll jump right in here, and we're just going to look at what responsible AI actually means here, because it seems like a really fancy term for something that's pretty basic. But really, when we look at what responsible AI looks like, it refers to the ethical and legal and transparent deployment of artificial intelligence tools in a way that protects privacy, it avoids bias or discrimination, ensures decisions are explainable, and then obviously follows the laws of governance and governance frameworks. So for municipality, this means balancing the power of AI with the public trust and compliance mandates. So that's really what today is going to be about, is how do we protect privacy when it comes to our ratepayers? How do we use technology that avoids bias and discrimination and make sure that decisions are explainable? When we look at why some municipalities are using AI, or why businesses in general are using AI, it's because municipalities are looking to improve efficiency. They're looking to automate permitting, approvals, things like road maintenance sort of things. So there's just a whole slew of different reasons why a municipality would want to use AI. But we also have to look at what the compliance has to say about this. So when we look at what the compliance has to say about this, we see the POPA now requires public bodies to build privacy by design into their systems, which means that in order to assess privacy risks, you have to do like a PIA before you implement any AI tools or any AI decision making. You have to always assess the privacy risks before implementing an AI solution. Other things that the compliance looks like is we have the privacy impact assessment. So that would be if you're using AI when you're collecting any sort of personally identifiable information, if you're using it or disclosing any sort of personal information, you have to do that privacy impact assessment. And then, of course, it also requires the mandatory breach notification to the Office of the Information Privacy Commissioner, right? So Alberta has one, the federal government has one, and it affects those individuals who had their privacy breached. So if you did have a breach, you'd have to notify the OIPC. Then we also have the other piece of legislation, which is the Access to Information Act. So that act, when it comes to AI, what we've understood it to be is that AI systems must not create a black box under the ATIA, meaning that citizens can always request to understand how that information or how those decisions were made by an AI algorithm. And so you must always be able to explain how that is under the ATIA, because that concept kind of ties back into the explainable AI portion and responsible AI portion. So typically you'll see AI tools with some sort of record retention, so that you can go back and take a look and see how that AI tool was able to make that decision, so that if you had a citizen or a ratepayer coming to your office, putting a Freedom of Information request in, you can actually explain how that looks. So some of the key areas, what we're going to be looking at is automated decision making. If an AI system denies a permit or flags a citizen behavior, or if your lawmakers are using AI for a decision on how to come up with bylaws, the municipality must be able to make sure how to explain how the AI came to that, where the data sourcing is. So like large AI systems often rely on large data sets, so you have to ensure you understand where all that data is coming from and how it's utilizing that data, and then understanding how third-party vendors can come into effect here as well. So making sure that your third-party vendors, if they use AI or are implementing your AI solutions, that they have compliance with the POPA and the ATIA. So that usually comes down just to a data sovereignty rule, or like the data must remain in Canada. And I'll have some examples of some people that are doing that well and some that aren't doing that. Now that we understand a little bit about the compliance side of things with the POPA and the ATIA, we can actually look at what happens when AI is handled irresponsibly. Typically, we'll do a risk scenario. It's not a real scenario, but it could be a real scenario. So the idea here is that you would imagine a municipality uses an AI to triage bylaw complaints, uses an algorithm to flag certain areas for heavier enforcement. This would be a great real world example where you have a system where you can track how many citizen complaints come in about break and enters or vehicle thefts and that sort of thing. So that would all be aggregated in this scenario into a AI that would be able to say, hey, you know what? This area actually has a heavier presence of crime, so we need to have some more enforcement in this area. And so throughout this scenario, you'll hear me talk about a little bit about some of this decision making here. What you have is this algorithm. It flags for the certain areas of heavier enforcement based on historical data, but no one actually verifies how that AI system works. So let's say it just decides one day that it's going to disproportionately target one neighborhood. And as we know, some municipalities might not do a PIA when implementing this tool. So in this scenario, no PIA was done. And then when a citizen submits a Freedom of Information request, no one can actually explain in the municipality why that neighborhood was potentially targeted. And that's obviously a direct violation of both the POPA and the ATIA. Because as we understood from the previous slide, under POPA, anytime you're implementing an AI solution, a privacy impact assessment should be done, especially when introducing new technologies that might handle personal information, and failing to conduct one would obviously result in the orders from the Office of the Information Privacy Commissioner. It can have some reputational damage and fines being handed out as well to the municipality. And then, of course, under the ATIA, it requires accessibility to the records. So in this case, the AI system wasn't able to be looked upon and said, hey, this is how it made the decision to target this neighborhood. So now under that act, you also don't have the information to give to that citizen. And so that citizen can also file a complaint with the Office of the Information Privacy Commissioner of Alberta. And again, you could have reputation and fines from reputation damage and fines from the Privacy Commissioner's office. The other thing that wasn't really understood at the time that this scenario took place was how the data was being used. So they didn't, this municipality, this fake one, didn't understand how their data was being used when making decisions. So the information was being, let's say, sent over to a data center in the US, and that data center was mining for more than just what the crime was. They were also harvesting personally identifiable information and that sort of thing, and again, could lead to a breach. And then, of course, the vendor that installed that didn't actually have that in their contract with the municipality saying, hey, this tool could potentially send information to the US, which would then be under the US's jurisdictions and laws. This is kind of a real world made up scenario of what could happen when AI is handled irresponsibly. Obviously, the liability would be on the municipality for not understanding the risks that they were setting themselves up for, and also having the onus on the municipality for hiring a contractor where they don't have a clause in place stating that they needed data sovereignty. So just an example of some ways some municipalities might be maybe duped. You get that nice salesperson from that AI company telling you, oh yeah, it's going to be fine, but then in reality, you get a freedom of information request, and then you're asking a bunch of questions as to why did we do this. Another thing I wanted to highlight, which complements the last slide here, is the huge risks of using public AI platforms. So things like ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Microsoft Copilot in the Consumer Edition, Claude AI, Perplexity, any of those AI large language models that you can access over the internet. There is a huge risk because all of that information is being compiled and used for decision making for the next chat. So this means that they learn off of the data that you put in there. So another good example would be a municipal intern or your minutes keeper putting information into ChatGPT because they get swamped and decide that they want to maybe put, I don't know, a resident complaint into ChatGPT to tidy up the language before sending it over to council because they think, hey, you know what, it's not really a big deal. But what they failed to realize is that in that email that they uploaded to ChatGPT, it had the person's address, the phone number, their name, their last name, and where they are residing. And so now the OpenAI system has all of that information, and you can't consent to say, yes, hold on to this information or not hold on to this information. It's going to hold on to it regardless. And now that's also just a violation with the POPA and the ATIA because now you can't recover it. It's unrecoverable. And now that person's information is being used and trained on. So that's a huge problem with using those public AI tools. That is one of the highlights for today is be cautious about using public AI tools because it does hold on to that information. It does learn off of that information. So definitely don't be putting any PII in there because you'll get in trouble here. And to further the public AI platform discussion here is why is this a problem? Obviously, you have the POPA risks. So unauthorized disclosure would be one of them. So personal information should not be shared outside of any authorized municipal system, right? You have public AI tools that operate under terms that may allow them to store and reuse your prompts. So having that personally identifiable information in there could be learned off of. You have the POPA, the privacy impact. So you didn't do the privacy impact assessment when you uploaded that information to ChatGPT. Technically, that would be in violation again because you didn't do the PIA. It's also not residing in Canada because most of those public tools are in the US. So now you're stuck with the US jurisdictions and you'll never be able to get that information back. Yeah, the other ATIA risks are the access risks. So if resident files a freedom of information request and the response was generated using like a public platform like ChatGPT or Gemini, you wouldn't be able to retrieve or record any of the inputs used, and you wouldn't be able to figure out how the platform kept that activity or logged that activity or came up with that response. There's also no transparency. You can't go to the public and be like, hey, we know how the data is being used because you're using a public platform. That's kind of a black box, so there's no transparency to the public because you don't know how that information was used. And so really what we're trying to get at here is any sort of resident name, address, email, complaint, permit request, financial info, it should never go into a public platform like ChatGPT, Gemini, or any AI system that is not under municipal control or under municipal contract, with a contract clearly stating that the data is staying within the data center in Canada or not leaving the office site itself. We're not here to try and scare you away from using AI tools, but we're just trying to bring awareness to the public ones and what information you could be sharing and causing a breach of the POPA and the ATIA. What we need to understand is there's opportunities for municipalities to use AI responsibly. And so we already have some municipalities in Alberta starting to adopt AI, and we have a few people in on the call that are adopting AI across various departments, from things like automating citizen service inquiries to optimizing how resources are deployed for infrastructure and maintenance. And the key here is the word responsible. So we're not talking about throwing a chatbot on every page of the municipal website. What we're talking about responsible AI is that you know where your data is and how it's being used. You understand how it's making the decisions that it's making. You've addressed the privacy, equity, and transparency side of things. And it's not necessarily about the new flashy tech. It's about building the trust within the community, within your teams, and within the municipality that you can trust AI in our municipal space. What we can look at is, well, AI can improve things like service without having to replace people, because I think that's another area that people are concerned, is that AI is going to take over their job. But we can actually look at how it can complement the work that they do, not replace the work that they do. An example would be like a well-configured AI chatbot that can obviously cut down a lot of the reception calls and things coming in, and you'd obviously have that human backstop for those residents that still require or expect some of that human interaction, right? So you've just been able to help cut down on some of their calls, and so they can actually help service the residents better, which is actually a bit of a benefit, because then when you have residents coming into the town office or the city office, you can actually address them without having to having these people either sit on hold, or you're on the call with somebody, or your receptionist is on the call with somebody and they're not able to address the resident right away. So that's one way, right? Other ways, you can use the meeting summaries or agenda drafting. As long as that data is staying internally, that should be okay. But the biggest thing here is that staff remain in control of that. And when you're looking at those systems, making sure that it's transparent and traceable. If you're looking at systems that influence public decisions, like fraud detection tools or traffic models, or anything that has to do with the public, is that you have explainability built into the tool, so you can explain why did this happen, and you can say that the tool should or shouldn't be used at that point. Then obviously aligning it with the POP and the ATIA, so understanding if you're collecting personally identifiable information into those AI tools, if a privacy impact assessment is required, most times it will be, and then you retrieve and explain the decisions for the ATIA requests. Now, I just wanted to go through some of the municipalities within Alberta and see what they're doing, because there's a couple of them that they're using AI and they may or may not realize that it's in violation of the POPA and the ATIA, and some of them may understand it but don't really care. But we'll jump into this example here with the town of Hannah. And so from the information that I was able to find online is that they're using an AI podcast system. And so what they do is they tried to improve public engagement, so that they would take their council minutes, council meetings, council agendas, putting this into, from my understanding, a public large language model. I have a sneaking suspicion that it's Notebook LM through Google. And so what it does is it converts long technical council documents into short conversational summaries through a use of a podcast. So it's usually you upload this information into, at least in my experience when I've used a similar platform, you upload this information to this public large language model, and it will spit out a 20-minute, half an hour podcast, depending on how much information you have there. And you can take that podcast, download it, and I believe what they're doing is they're putting it on to their website to reach obviously younger audiences, those with accessibility challenges, visual impairments, maybe have reading fatigue. So they're trying to improve their public engagement. They're trying to obviously improve their transparency and trust within the community. So they're showing that they have a commitment to modernizing their communications and presenting key decisions and discussions in a more human and relatable way. I think a lot of people have kind of gotten into the podcast feel over the last little bit. I think podcasts really have taken off. So I think what they're trying to do is just be a little bit more relatable for the audiences that they're trying to go after. And they are trying to make it replicable to other communities as well. So if it is the Google platform, it would be a very cost-effective and high-impact tool for other Alberta municipalities to increase civic literacy and engagement and having people understand what's going on in the communities. However, that being said, there are large areas of concern with this. And again, I can't verify if they're using Notebook LM, but Google Notebook LM is a public platform, and we just talked a lot about how using public platforms and having personally identifiable information and the trust and the transparency and all of those things that you typically want to have aren't there, right? You're using a public platform. You don't have access to their black box. You can't see how it's made their decisions. You can't see how the podcast was able to take that information, use it, and then if it's being trained on any of their other models. So huge area of concern there, because that obviously would violate the POPA and the ATIA if they had any personally identifiable information on there, and if they didn't do a privacy impact assessment. So huge area of concern, right? And then obviously from the data governance concern as well, because now that data isn't necessarily just staying within Canada, it's also going to the US and anywhere else that data might, or Google might have their data centers. So now that information that they've uploaded is now available for all of the different areas that the data centers are in. So definitely got some concerns, right? Because if they're not scraping out some of that identifiable information, then obviously a breach there. So HANA, they're doing a great job of staying relevant. However, this could be a potential issue for them in the future should somebody want a Freedom of Information request and want to know how this large language model is coming up with the podcasts. So HANA is doing a good job, some areas of concern. And then we have Lethbridge, and Lethbridge is doing something a little bit different here. They're doing something to help empower entrepreneurs with AI. When we look at what they're doing, so the economic development of Lethbridge has partnered with a company called Digiloy to launch a new AI-powered digital assistant to help transform how entrepreneurs are accessing support and resources within Southern Alberta. So what they're doing well here is they have this AI assistant named Robin, I believe it is, and it is their public-facing assistant designed to help entrepreneurs navigate core business concepts like building a value proposition or mapping a business model with them. They also have another tool within this called Charlie. It helps support internal staff, helping the economic development of Lethbridge. Business advisors locate relevant tools, forms, resources by utilizing AI to go through their data set and figure out where these resources are and how to pull them up. So it's saving them time and improving the service quality, because now something that might have taken a couple days to get back to an entrepreneur or somebody looking to start a business, it could probably be done in a matter of seconds. Dual assistant approach shows kind of how AI can both support public access and internal efficiencies without having to sacrifice control or quality. The nice thing here is that they use local resources. So both of the assistants that I talked about are powered and curated by the private knowledge base in the economic development Lethbridge, meaning that they're only using local documents and validated documents that they want in this AI system. So it doesn't have access to the internet. There's nothing leaving the site. So it's using what they already had access to. It's just using it in a more efficient manner, which means that it's more accurate, consistent, and aligned with obviously the local regulations. They've probably gone through, and I couldn't find any information on this, but I would assume that they probably would have done a privacy impact assessment and made sure that it followed the POPA and the ATIA guidelines on AI use and how to use the data within their data set. This is kind of a great example of responsible AI by design, is they went with a company that keeps the data in Canada. They built it on their data and it doesn't have access to the outside world, and the outside world doesn't have access to it. So they're making this a very scalable model for other municipalities. So they're making sure that they're trying to get the word out there so that other municipalities can pick this up and try to use it for themselves. And instead of using a public platform, they have it purposely built by Digiloy. I'm probably butchering that name, but this is a very good step on responsible AI because they've asked where the data was hosted. Like I said, they probably did the privacy impact assessment and they ensured auditability and transparency. So they have the answers if a freedom of information request came in. When we look at implementing for yourself and your municipalities, we look at, well, first things first, we got to look at, do we create an AI use policy? What does that actually look like? Well, we would define acceptable AI use in different cases, right? So you'd want an acceptable AI use for your staff, meaning that you understand that your staff may want to use AI tools in the future or right now, but they shouldn't be using public platforms. And if they are using public platforms, you should be outlining in this policy that these public platforms cannot have any publicly or personally identifiable information being uploaded into them. And same things with having them understand that if a freedom of information request came in, they could be held liable for uploading this information into a public platform because there is no transparency, and we need to make sure that there is transparency. Other things, you'd want to make sure that the AI use is covering both the POPA and the ATIA compliance. You would have things in there about conducting PIA when it comes to implementing a new AI tool, data sovereignty, and you would want to engage the community and inform them about the AI tool use so that they have some feedback in case they think it's a good idea or a bad idea. But at least then they are aware that this is taking place and how it can potentially impact the community. So some things that we typically see when it comes to responsible AI use, you have a permit application review. So AI would flag any missing documents, detect common errors in an online permit or application. You typically have your human oversight, so a municipal clerk or a planner who reviews the flagged applications before they are rejected, delayed, or approved. Because the AI system doesn't make the binding decision, you should be able to use something like that in your municipality to help the automation of processes and application review and all of those things that typically are a huge pain to go through manually. Other things too, like we saw with the town of Hannah, you can use things like council meeting summaries. So you can use AI as long as it's not a public platform, or if your meetings don't have personally identifiable information, you can have it generate written or audio summaries of council minutes for public engagement. You'd have human oversight, so you'd have somebody in the communication staff to review the summary for the tone, the accuracy, and the context before publishing, because unfortunately some of these AI platforms do make things up or they hallucinate, and so some of the accuracy and context in there might be different. So again, you'd want to have that human oversight to prevent misinterpretation or the hallucination things that might come through. So other things too, we've seen companies use this for hiring or HR screenings. AI would suggest your top candidates based on resume keywords. You'd have the human oversight, like a hiring committee, to review full applicants to ensure that a fair and equitable selection process has taken place, and obviously will help avoid systematic biases from over-reliance on the AI algorithms. And so yeah, there's so many different ways that a municipality can implement AI, but making sure that you're following your AI use policy, you're going and checking things for audit, like you're auditing things for bias and transparency. It's in compliance with the POP and the ATIA. You're doing your PIAs and you're engaging your community with that. So as we start to wrap up here, final takeaways here is we want to use AI to enhance but not replace a public service, right? So having a lot of the chats about, hey, this is not going to replace your job, or it's not going to replace what you're doing, but it's going to help complement it so that you can take some of the stress and some of the workload off of your plate. So really using AI from what are we doing from a manual process right now and automating that and allowing that human interaction or that human oversight to take place, so that if you ever had a question about, well, how did it come to these decisions, you would at least have a human overseeing the final decision making process. You would have the priority of the POPA and the ATIA and the Canadian data residency rules in place. And if you're ever in doubt, you can take a pause and just say, hey, you know what, this might be a time that we need to do a privacy impact assessment, because you may or may not get salespeople in the door talking about an AI solution that you don't know anything about, and you go to sign the paperwork and you realize, hey, you know what, we actually don't know a lot about this system, and then you do your privacy impact assessment and you realize that this company may or may not be a good fit anymore, right? So if you're ever in doubt, just pause, do a privacy impact assessment, and just take a look and see if this is legitimate or not. A little bit shorter today, which is not a bad thing. It'll give you some time for lunch. I would love to hear if you had any questions, comments. Talked a lot about compliance and the governance side of things. I would love to hear what you guys are doing right now for AI solutions. If you're looking to implement an AI solution, if you found any of this helpful, feel free to drop it in the chat, raise your hand, come off mute. This is the time for you guys. So one person in the chat here, is there any further information on when the province is releasing their AI regulations? Great question. I haven't heard anything yet. We have another question here. What is your opinion on using ChatGPT paid version with data controls, improved model for everyone set to off, with or without using personally identifiable information? So unfortunately, ChatGPT improved model for everyone set to off. Yeah, you can turn it off. I don't know how truthful turning it off really is, because we don't get to actually see what happens on the back end of things. Just because it's not improving it for everyone else, that doesn't mean that the system doesn't still have access to prior chats. So what happens is when you tick that setting off, you can still use chat in the fashion of, hey, you know what, you can, if you start a new chat, it still has access and history to all of those previous chats. The only way to clear that out is to go through and delete that. And even then, you still have no idea how it's coming up with the decision making and that sort of thing. I think if you're using it without personally identifiable information, you would probably be okay, as long as you're not using it to direct decisions within the municipality. So an example would be if you were to go into ChatGPT and say, hey, how do I bring better economic development to my town? And it gives you a whole game plan on how to bring economic development to your town, but then you also upload that to your website, or you start putting it into council documents and other things that are public. And then let's say you have a freedom of information request come in and say, hey, how did you come up with the idea of bringing economic development to the town, and what were the decisions made on getting these answers, right? So then you'd be in a little bit of a sticky situation, because you wouldn't be able to say, hey, well, I used the ChatGPT platform and it gave me a list of responses, and here's the prompts that I used, and here's how it decided to analyze my data and spit out this response. Typically, ChatGPT will just give you the response. So you have to kind of walk a fine line when it comes to that, because if you're using it to make decisions within a municipality, well, then you have to be able to identify how it got to that idea or to that decision, where if you were to just use it like a public platform and not use it to make decisions, you would be okay. Hopefully that helps answers the question. I know it's a little bit long-winded there, but just wanted to come up with an example there. Yeah, so the idea here is we want municipalities to adopt AI. It's just making sure that they adopt it properly. If there's any other questions, feel free to, again, drop it into the chat, or feel free to shoot me an email after the fact. I will end it, so it might end on your side. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the new year, as this is our last webinar for this season and for the year. So we will see you in the new year, and good luck, and see you next time.